So, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Long Road Back, a podcast all about the hidden side of athlete recovery, give athletes a voice, but ultimately to help people feel less alone during their recovery process. Thank you so much for the support on all the recent episodes. It really, really does mean a lot to me. And I'm very, very excited to announce my guest today. So, what I will say about this person and this guest today is someone who is an absolute inspiration for so many people online. His remarkable story that he tells so amazingly and honestly online on his platforms, both Instagram and TikTok, provides not only a fascinating and honest insight into his own recovery journey, but I can honestly say he was actually one of the key reasons and inspirations behind why I actually started Rebuild in the first place, which actually we were kind of briefly chatting before we came on air. So I'm actually very delighted to say that Jack is joining me today. So Jack, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Tom. Really appreciate it. I know we were chatting about it before, but I'm really excited for us to chat today. It's kind of nice because I feel like while we've both got different kind of health scenarios, we've got so much in common and so much to talk about. And I think what we're both kind of trying to do at the moment is very similar. So I feel like we're going to have. Well, I think we already know we have a lot in common, so it's great.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate that intro. Very kind, and it's just unreal to hear that me posting was helpful. So that's
No,
class,
for
man. I'm really
sure.
glad.
No, yeah, and it's funny. So most of the listeners won't know this, but I remember we actually used to chat back and forth. It started off quite small. I remember asking you bits and bobs because I've taken inspiration from your post before. I've looked at you for like an inspiration to the style of the content and stuff. And we suddenly had this realization, especially I was like, well, hang on, why haven't I just had this discussion with you on the
Yeah.
podcast? And like, great for these exact conversations. No, and you raise a great point. I think what I've tried to do with the long road back, and I know some of the listeners from the early episodes know this as well, is that it started off as a very elite athlete focus. And I openly know that. It started off that I really wanted to tie into, the connections I had both from university, tying to their experiences and how we can learn from that. And that is absolutely still a big part. But what I've also learned as I've branched the podcast out to the wider themes of recovery and injury and chronic pain and things I'm sure we'll come on to, that I found that I had a much easier time of resonating with the podcast that I was running myself, and I thought, well, if I'm enjoying it more, having the balance of both the elite side and unfortunately, I love to say we are. Unfortunately, we're not elite athletes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately,
Not right now.
not
You
right now.
never
You never
know,
know.
but
You do
probably
never
not.
know.
Yeah.
No, I was watching the ice hockey at the Winter Olympics, and I said to my mum I wanted to play, and she went, "Well, we'll just we'll see about that." But no, exactly. And I think you mentioned, and we'll come on to those themes. But no, I mean, I'm delighted to have you on. I think that as we'll come on to, briefly chat about your journey, and then we'll kind of get into those themes we mentioned. That there's so much we can learn from each other's journeys. And whilst I think we have gone through drastically different experiences, some might, like, so for example, might be injury sport related. Some might be, as in your journey, you'll explain
Yeah.
more, not necessarily a choice in that sense in terms of how it came about. So, but the themes remain the same. So, I think what would be really helpful for the listeners would be if you're able to give like a brief, background to your journey and kind of where it starts and then kind of where it's kind of at now.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. I think I'll try and give as short of a recap of my journey and my experience as I can because I could talk about it all day. So I'm 25 and I've got two metal hips. So I had a double hip replacement last February last year at age 23. And I know people watching this are probably thinking double hip replacement at 23, that's crazy. Long story short, I had a really rare condition as a child that stunted the growth of my hips and it just led to continuous issues up until a couple of years ago where my hips were more or less just finished. That's the best way of describing it. I had a condition called Perthes disease, which is it's a rare disease that affects blood flow to the femoral head of the hip. It occurs in roughly 1 in 25 to 50,000 kids in the UK anyway. Which, if I crunch the numbers, there really isn't that many people with Perthes in Ireland. So it was quite difficult to get diagnosed and get the right treatment as a child. It affected my right hip from around age 5. And then I was part of the unlucky bunch who also get it in the other hip. So from age 5 to 10, I was affected in both hips. And what it basically did was it stopped blood from flowing to the top of the hip joint. And as you can imagine, that affects how the hip grows. The bone basically died and had to grow back. And it basically left me with a hip bone that was the shape of a rugby ball, not a football. And so you can imagine that sitting inside the joint, it just wasn't good. So, luckily I managed to get on pretty okay during my teenage years. I managed to play sports. I played football. I played Gaelic football and Irish sport. And I managed pretty well. I wasn't really affected by pain like how I was in my childhood. I had a pretty bad limp during my childhood and I suffered with pain in my hips very badly. And that pain came back around age 18 when my right hip started getting sore all of a sudden. A quick x-ray showed that my hips were in really bad nick. They had almost no cartilage left, very little space in the joint, and it essentially meant that I was very, very close to getting arthritis and needing a double hip replacement. So that's basically what brought me up to age 18. And between age 18 and 23, you're thinking, well, what took 5 years to get a double hip replacement? It was just a difficulty in getting the surgery itself, in finding a consultant who, first of all, was willing to operate on me. Second of all, who was willing to kind of think outside the box and see the human side of it. Because as you can imagine, it's not common to get hip replacement in your 20s. It's not common to get hip replacement under the age of 60, to be honest. So I unfortunately fell outside the norm and the statistics of hip replacement. And what that meant was that I spent 5 years trying every treatment under the sun. I got steroidal injections in the hips. I went to physiotherapy every week for 5 years. You can imagine I'm really good mates with my physio at this point because I've seen
Yeah,
him
yeah.
hundreds of times. I tried every type of painkiller, anti-inflammatory, ice packs, gels, balms, everything, hot baths, cold baths, everything I could every day to try and kind of reduce the pain. But I was just in a position where that chronic pain in my hips was getting worse and worse and worse. My quality of life was going downhill. My mental health was getting affected and was going downhill. And I was eventually put in a position where I thought to myself, I could keep going on like this, but I just don't think I can afford to. My first consultant actually told me that I needed to wait until age 40 to get the operation. That was pretty devastating news at the time. And the more the years went on, I realized I'm not going to make it to 40 at this
Yeah.
rate. I simply can't. I can't keep going on like this. So I basically saw multiple different consultants and I finally found someone who listened to my experience. And he said, this is not how a young person deserves to live. He actually said he was worried about me, that he was worried about how the pain was affecting me and my ability to keep going. So, long story short, I got the operation last February. It was a bilateral hip replacement. I say a double hip replacement. That's kind of I feel like I've kind of just kind of coined that term because you say bilateral hip replacement and people kind of think, what does that mean? It
Working
means
out the
that
angles. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I get it because it's not really a common surgery, but it basically means that I got both of my hips replaced in the same operation on the same day, which is uncommon. And that basically meant that my issues were done. It just left me with a huge, huge operation to recover from.
No, I mean, that's amazing. I mean, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that there's so much I want to unpack with what you mentioned. But the first thing that really stood out to me, and we can kind of bring into this idea of that chronic pain, is feeling listened to. And it's such a simple word, and it doesn't actually get discussed that much. But even as you were describing the fact that it was so hard for so long, and then you spoke to this one surgeon who you felt like listened to your story, not just from an injury perspective, from a human's perspective. I find that so interesting to hear. So I'd love to hear a bit more about that. In that, almost, how did it feel when you almost finally felt listened to?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that because it's honestly huge. It's such a big part of my journey. It changed everything because I had seen multiple different consultants and, you know, even when they declined, surgery and wouldn't help, I always respected their medical opinion, but I always really struggled with the fact that I never felt listened to. I never felt like any of these specialists or experts were actually listening to how it was affecting me. I feel like the focus, especially because we're talking about orthopedics here, and I'm sure you can relate, it's always about how does your x-ray look? And how does your x-ray look and your prognosis, compared to the usual statistics? Whereas I'm here telling an expert about how much this pain is affecting me. And for years, I never felt listened to until I met my surgeon who did my operation, and he listened and he validated my feelings. And, I know he's a surgeon, he's not a therapist, but for him to say, I understand how much this pain must be affecting you and it's not right, and I'm going to do the operation because I think you need it. It was extremely validating for me, and it was a huge turning point. It actually changed my life because in in a split second, I went from thinking that I was going to have to wait until my 40s for this life-changing operation to being told, you deserve it, you need it, I'm going to do it. So it was just, to be honest, man, it was huge. And I look back at how I wasn't listened to at times. There's a couple of things, uh, I, I remember telling one specialist I was with for a while about how much the pain was affecting me, because as I now know, what my recent surgeon said is that my X-rays don't look as bad as how my pain is. He said that there's some older people whose X-rays look way worse. Their hips look way worse on a scan, but they're not even in pain. So it really depends. And I had one specialist tell me, "Uh, I know that the pain is like bad. Have you tried maybe taking Nurofen, paracetamol?" I know it's a bit of a pain in the
Yeah.
neck. He actually used the words pain in the neck, and it actually, I'm not someone who gets offended. Most of my friends know that I'm fairly kind of relaxed person. I don't really tend to get offended at things or bothered by what people say, but it was crushing because it just felt like I was being vulnerable. I was trying to explain how much I was struggling, and it was like I was just passed off. So, it was just, it meant everything to me that I finally found a doctor who listened to me. And you said it yourself, it's such a simple word, it should be such a simple thing, but why is it that I would say the majority of young people with health issues aren't listened to? I'm not sure why that's the case, but it seems to be a huge problem.
I mean, I'm so happy. It's the wrong word to say happy, but I'm so fascinated hearing you say this because I don't want to I don't want to flip this back on me, but just briefly that. So we were chatting a bit off air about some the nerve damage issues I have in my other foot, in my kind of non-surgical foot. And hearing you describe your journey, and I know yours longer, don't get me wrong, 5 years, much longer than 1 year, but hearing you describe this idea of constantly being told, you know, have you tried this? Or, you should try this, or the dismissal, or this constant, the language is so important. It's the idea that
Yeah,
I'm not saying you're not listening to me in the sense that you're not listening to my MRI result, or you're not listening to my, let's say for me, a nerve conduction study results. Like, what I'm saying is you're not listening to how this is affecting me. This isn't a little, a pain that comes up every now and then. This is everything. This is my life. My life is defined at the moment by this pain that's coming up. And hearing you mention about how important it was to be validated, I think it's so important. I think it's something that it's that human element, and why, we were kind of joking about AI off air, but this idea is it's that human element is everything, isn't it? And I think
it's
that,
huge.
again, like just coming back to that kind of chronic side, I mean, it must have been exhausting. I mean, being in pain for that long.
It was just so draining. And what's actually funny is that over the years, it became more mentally draining than physically, because I think a lot of people will be able to relate to this, and I think you definitely will as well. It's the fact that you don't get a break from it. Like when you're working your full time job, you clock in, you clock out, you get to enjoy your morning or evening or your weekend, you get a break, you get your summer holidays. When you've got chronic pain that you can't get on top of or manage, it's just relentless. And I think that's the thing that I struggled with the most, because there's days where you can do your best to manage it, but the fact that you don't get a break, it means I had many days along the years where it was too much and I broke down and I didn't know how I was going to keep going on. And I knew my condition was degenerative, so I knew it was getting worse. And it just took all of my energy. It consumed me. Not to mention how difficult it is to maintain chronic pain and to try and manage. If I used to joke and I used to say that, like, it was like a part-time job, like how surgery recovery is a part-time job. When you add up the amount of time and energy spent on stretching, on appointments, Going to physio once a week, you think, okay, but like that was over 5 years, you're talking maybe 250 sessions. Like even just having that on every week, having to put ice packs on my hips every morning and evening, having to stretch, having to sit up from my desk doing my 9 to 5
Yeah.
every 15 minutes because I'm in too much pain to sit. It was just too much to manage. And that's why whenever anyone sends me a message, let's say saying, I'm also a young person with hip issues, I'm debating whether I should get the hip replacement done. And the first thing I say is, you have no idea how life changing it is to be pain free. It's as simple as you remove the pain, and yeah, the pain is gone, but it removes everything else as well. It's like removing a dark cloud. It's like a second chance at life. So I actually feel like I can't find the words to describe how much it affected me. I'm doing
Yeah.
my best, but it's really
No, no,
hard to put your finger on it.
no, it's, and I'll try and add to that in that, like, it's because the fact that you can't put into words shows how big of an impact this has. And I've had conversations with people, and we were chatting off air as well. But I think the the pain, it just consumes you, doesn't it? It's just that everything becomes a cost benefit analysis. How much pain can I tolerate to go and do this with my friends? How much pain can I tolerate? It could be something as simple as you say, sitting down. I'm trying to think of a situation, maybe at the cinema, or these other social situations that should be normal but aren't normal. In fact, they're the opposite of normal. They become a challenge, and how much pain can I tolerate? And you mentioned the kind of the degenerative nature of your disease, and I think just translating that into the almost the injury recovery side of things, especially when you have no end date, whether it's getting worse or whether goalposts are constantly moving backwards. For me, it might be nerve pain at the moment. For others, it might be, tendinopathy. And I've spent lots of people tendinitis. It can be really nasty in terms of the duration. It's like when you're suffering and you don't know when the end goal will be, and there's nothing you can do. It is brutal. It is brutal. And I think that's something you said about that it doesn't stay with your friends. It doesn't stay at the coffee shop. It kind of follows you home. I think that's really
Yeah.
interesting. And then, were there any experiences or moments you can kind of pinpoint where you really felt that, like, oh, it kind of really did kind of come home with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, you mentioned that there's no end goal in sight when you're in that position. Uh, it's actually difficult because I feel like maybe half the people listening to this are recovering from surgery. You've
Yes.
got that light at the end of the tunnel, and that's what keeps you going in the dark moments. But when you've the other half of people who are in the same position that I was in, where you're suffering and you don't know when that suffering is going to end, you really have to dig deep to get through that. And I think something that I did across the years was I said to myself, I still have to live my life. I said across the years, I'm 19, 20, 21, 22. I have to try and live my life. So I still did
100%.
things like you said that it's like will I put myself through the pain to live my life and suffer afterwards, or will I not? And I look back, and some of the best memories I have over the past couple of years are, let's say, going on holidays with my girlfriend, going to concerts if my favorite rapper or DJ came
Yeah,
to
yeah.
Dublin. And I said at the time, I thought to myself, going to this is going to destroy me, and I'm going to be in pain for at least a week afterwards, but I still have to live my life. And I don't know whether it's like a lose lose, because you try and push yourself, as you said. Are you gonna meet your friends? Are you gonna do this social thing? And it's great that you can do it, but when you're suffering with an injury, when you're suffering with chronic pain, it comes at such a big cost that after every single one of those things that I mentioned, arriving home from a holiday after a long flight, arriving home after standing at a concert, the pain that I was hit with afterwards, every single time I thought to myself, well, that was just not worth it. So it's a lose lose, because I did those things to try and support my mental health, because I thought to myself, if I just prioritize my pain and minimizing my pain alone, it'll kill my mental health, because I'll spend all of my time indoors. I'll be sitting on that couch over there watching TV, playing PlayStation, because at least if I'm sitting down, I'm in less pain,
For
right?
sure. Yeah, yeah.
But and I tried that, but then I realized it was just I was falling deeper and deeper into a hole, especially mentally, because I found it really difficult to keep going when I didn't have that end goal in sight. So that's why one day I kind of broke down, and I just had enough, and I said, I can't keep doing this. So I basically campaigned for my own operation. I basically begged hey doctor, can you please give me two new hips? and
Yeah.
that's what's so funny. It's kind of ironic having to beg to get such a major surgery done, but I did, and here I am. I'm 100 times better than I was, and I'm so glad I did it.
Yeah.
So it is a bit of a funny one.
It's so inspirational. I think that the the campaigning to have your own surgery is so interesting, isn't it? Because on the surface, we feel that, well, almost this idea that it sounds selfish, but it's not meant to be, that, well, if you knew how much pain I was in, you would want to get the surgery as well. But
Oh
obviously,
yeah, yeah,
there's no
yeah,
quantifiable, unfortunately, or not yet. There may well be one day. Who knows? This idea of how much pain one individual is in versus another, and obviously different pain thresholds and whatnot. But I think when it translates into your normal life, however that may look, this idea that when the injury becomes the dominant force, the everything revolves around that injury, especially with chronic pain. And I do, I want the theme obviously more of this episode is around that chronic pain, and then athletes and people going through recovery of chronic pain. That balance between knowing when to, I say pull the trigger, if that's the right word, but the idea that when to make that decision to go, you know what, no, I am going to campaign for my own, surgery, or it could be a specific injection. Who knows what it is?
yeah,
It was almost like we shouldn't normalize being in pain when there is an option to get us out of it. I think that's definitely something that. And look, you've played. Is it GAA? Is that the
yeah. That's
abbreviation?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
GAA. I played rugby. That people who play these sports and people who do these things, that your pain thresholds are naturally quite high, probably higher than we realize. I think in terms of the things that can be normalized in sport, and the pushing through pain, being resilient. Those are all and things I'm so happy that I did through rugby. I'm so happy that I learned those skills, and through recovery, obviously, as well. But it's when that balance between, okay, there's being resilient and being strong and pushing, and being brave and whatnot. Then it's suddenly the other side of the coin. Well, hang on a minute here. We need to get this looked at. And I think that is a really kind of I say a fine line to walk, but it's some. I think it's like listening to yourself and listening to your body and going, right, we can make a decision from there. So I think just moving on to this idea, and I really want to kind of explore this briefly. This idea of like identity, and I think that
yeah.
what I've really loved seeing on your page is the learning to, like, that kind of, both from the learning to walk series and again confident walking again to the running. I'm really interested to see how do you kind of see your walking and running journey at the moment.
That's a great question, and I'm really glad you asked, because I'm really glad to be at a point where I can talk about it. That I am doing so much better. It's a funny one. It's complicated because in order to get the help that I needed and to get my new hips, it basically meant I had to start over. So for me, I guess getting both hips replaced together, it inevitably meant for I had a much more difficult recovery ahead. So I just thought, as me starting over, two new hips, I had to learn how to walk again first and then try and build my confidence. And I'm not comparing myself to how I was before surgery, because I actually can't. I'll never be the same. My legs will never be the same. I think I could potentially be better than I've ever been. So it's not that I'll never be as good, it's just that I'll never be the same. So for me, in terms of my identity, it's a tough one, because in one way, I feel like my, experience with my hip issues and my surgery, it's become a huge part of my identity. But I've also done my absolute best to make sure that it doesn't define me either. It's like I'm allowing it to be part of my identity rather than it taking over who I am. And I know that's probably, maybe doesn't make sense straight away. But for me, I decided as soon as I got the operation done, I said, you know what? This is happening to me either way. I can either be, ashamed of it, try and hide it, and let it get the better of me, or I can embrace it and just accept this is who I am. It's not my fault I have to learn how to walk again. And, I'm sure there's lots of other people out there in the same position. So let's just do it. Let's be strong about it. Let's be, proud of it. So that's been my attitude throughout my recovery. I actually the reason why I started posting in the first place was because I said to my girlfriend, I said, you know what? I'm guessing word is probably going to get out that, like, but Jack, yeah, do you hear you got a double hip
Yeah,
replacement? And you're going, Jesus, like, so I kind of figured, look, people are probably going to know about it anyway. So if I post a TikTok video about it, like it's not like I'm, letting the cat out of the bag. I think people are going to know about it anyway. And that really helped me because for years I was very quiet about what I was going through. One of the toughest periods of my life was trying to finish my college degree while suffering with this in silence. And for me, I wasn't strong enough at the time. I wasn't in a position where I felt confident enough to tell people about what I was going through. So I was suffering with the pain in silence. I was really struggling to get by. I was struggling all the time, and nobody knew about it. And that's one of the hardest things I've been through. So I said to myself, I'm not going to do it again. I'm going to embrace this, hard period ahead from learning to walk again. And I'm really glad I did that because now that I'm learning to run again and rebuilding, it's something that I can actually be really excited about. And I'm excited to share, and I'm proud of how far I've come. And it's just great. It's one of the best decisions I've made, just deciding to open up about it, because by doing that it's like I got the better of it rather than my whole experience getting the better of me.
No, I mean that's amazing, and that sharing is so important, isn't it? It's that, and the old phrase, isn't it? Problem shared is a problem halved, and that however you define the idea of halved might vary per person, but the idea that it helps. I've never had an experience where I've opened up to someone that I trust, and I think obviously there's nuances to this. I understand that, but this idea that trust is that, and it comes back to the idea of being seen, doesn't it? And that understanding that once you feel heard and recognized, and almost that understanding of how you're actually feeling and the weight that is going on, it means that when we can start building those blocks up, you feel that much happier in yourself almost, because then you can share it with those same people again. I think there's so much power kind of in that. And just before I come on to the idea, I really want to touch on something you mentioned about identity. But just before that, it sounds like that acceptance about the situation was a key stepping stone to kind of where you are now.
Absolutely. It was huge. I can't actually even describe how big it was because I just struggled for so long in my situation because I couldn't accept it. What I will say is my mentality since a very young age, I've never actually thought to myself, why me? It's never been in my nature. I've never thought that, with how rare my disease was, 1 in 50,000, and then one in 10 people who get it in both hips. So 1 in 500,000 people get what I get. I never thought to myself, poor me, why me? How unlucky am I? But for years, I did struggle to accept that this was my situation. I just struggled to get on with it and roll with it for a good while. And as soon as I accepted that this is my life, this is what I'm dealing with, it changed everything because instead of being ashamed of it, instead of feeling like I had to hide it, it meant that I could just wear it on my sleeve, and just say, right, this is it. I have to get my hips replaced at age 23. There's, nothing that can change that. What I can do is really rally with this and be proud of it and own it. I feel like by accepting my situation, I got to actually own it, and you know, rather than it getting the better of me, I felt like I was in control as soon as I accepted it. It also helped me mentally because I think when you struggle to accept the position you're in, it's hard to not feel quite depressed about it. And that's something that I definitely experienced. I felt I really struggled with feeling down for, a long time because of the position I was in. I mentioned before, it felt like I was in a hole. But as soon as I accepted it and kind of said, this is what's going on, I can't do anything to change it. I actually I can't tell you who said it, but I heard someone describe the difference between fault and responsibility, and I feel like it's really relevant here. Something may not be your fault. Inevitably, it's your responsibility to deal with it and to get on with things. That's what I thought. I remember seeing that at the time. I wish I could say who said it, but
Yeah.
I can't remember. But I thought to myself, you know what? It isn't my fault that I have this rare disease, but at the end of the day, it is my responsibility to deal with it. And this is my life. And, there's no point in trying to deny it. As soon as I accepted that that was my situation, it just made me feel like more motivated about the future and dealing with it. And it was around that time that I said, you know what? I'm not dealing with this. I'm going to get the operation and I'm going to learn to walk again and get my new hips and live a better life. So, for I know the original question was
No, no,
about
I love it. Yeah.
the acceptance side of it. It's huge and it's not easy. I don't want to make it sound easy. It's something that people comment and message me about all the time. How have you accepted the situation you're in? And I think what helped me was just thinking about the fact that I couldn't change the position I was in. I could just deal with it as best I could. So that really helped me, and it really set me up to, recover from my surgery strongly, like how I did.
No, for sure, and it's because it's not something that can happen overnight necessarily. It's not necessarily a okay, I'm accepted it now. Happy days.
Yeah.
It's the build up of decisions and language and mindset kind of again and again and again. And it doesn't have to be. And again, like we mentioned all the time on both our pages, that injuries are not linear. It doesn't have to. It doesn't mean it's going to be 100% every day. I mean, there's days why especially there's certain things I see, certain rugby games I might watch, my friends are playing. I'm like, oh God, I wish I could be doing that. But then the more you kind of take that step back and bring that control, as you rightly mentioned, it's okay, I can manage this. I'm so much more than this injury. I'm not going to let it define me. But it all does come back to it, doesn't it? That kind of acceptance. And I'm going to show my my kind of geekiness, nerdiness here that it's amazing how much kind of film and television actually have played a role in my own recovery and still are playing a role in my recovery. Because I love things like Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings and these things. And I remember a quote in Game of Thrones that I think Tyrion, I think he's a dwarf in the show, is saying to Jon Snow, the illegitimate son, basically, two outcasts. And he's basically saying, never forget who you are, wear it like armor. And I was like, he said that, and I was like, there was so much power in that, in terms of that acceptance, and that,
yeah,
if you can accept these things gradually, and obviously it takes him a long time in the show to be able to accept it. That's a whole different thing. But I just love hearing you say that, and I think that there's so much power in the acceptance, and it's not easy, and I think we'll all openly say it's not easy, but I think just knowing that each day we can take that extra step towards acceptance is massive. And I think that as we kind of come to the end here, I think there's kind of two questions I kind of think off the top of my head, but one in particular that I'm really interested to ask you, and I've thought this for a while, is this idea that what does success look like now following your injury? And I know it's a word, so in sport it can be quite easy to throw success around, but after discussion with one of my friends who had quite a serious injury, he was saying that, well, success is changing, and I don't truly know what success is. And ever since then, I've always been intrigued about what people's ideas are of success, and when you feel like you've taken full control of your injury. So I'd love to kind of hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I love that question because it's something I feel really strongly about, and I feel like I probably talk about quite a lot as well, is that for me, success is me doing my best and giving 100% and achieving as much as I can given my situation. So at the moment, I'm trying to learn how to run again. And for me, the thoughts of a particular milestone, of a certain time, a certain distance, it hasn't even popped into my head once, because that's not what it's about for me. I understand that for professional athletes, I can completely get the big milestones that people have. I feel like for athletes, it's, for it could be making the top end, could be like making the Olympics, or for like a footballer, it could be making the Premier League. I think that's great. I really love having big goals and big dreams in mind. But for me, in my situation, for me, success is doing as much as I can given my limitations that I'm very aware of. And, as I said already, I've accepted that. So I thought to myself before, wouldn't it just be so cool if I like ran a marathon one day with my two metal hips? That would be unreal. But that's not something I think about every day. What I think about is, if I'm giving 100% to my recovery and my rebuilding phase, and if I'm doing my best, that's what success is for me. Because at the end of the day, I can't compare myself to anyone else. It's actually great, because even if I wanted to, I'm not able to,
Yeah.
because so I'm gonna have to find another guy in his 20s who's had a double hip replacement because he had Perthes disease. Like, we're talking at least 1 in a million here, so there's no
Yeah.
one to compare myself to, even if I wanted to. And I'm actually really glad, because I used to compare myself to people, and it was an unfair comparison, because it's never a level playing field, and you think you might be like someone else, but we're all different and we all have our own struggles and things to deal with. So I'm just looking at me and my situation. And for me, as long as I'm doing my best, as long as I'm constantly making progress and moving forward, that's what success is for me. So I'd say I'm constantly looking towards the future, but I look at how my recovery's been going so far this past year and a bit, and I'm happy. I'm happy with how I've done, and it was never a case of like sometimes I get comments of people saying I was back running a month after a double hip replacement, and that's great for that person. But for me, I'm really glad
Slightly
to be
different.
walking without a limp after a year.
Mm.
That's my definition of success. It's like for me in my situation, am I doing my best? So that's probably that's what I'd call success for me.
No, I'm. It's such an honest reflection, isn't it? And I can really resonate with that. And it sometimes it really does take a big life changing experience with pain and change and whether it's injuries or disease, these things. It sometimes it really does take something like that to make you really look back and go, okay, my perspective really does change. And I think it's so easy. I know I've seen all the social media stuff about, lock in and do these things and hit these goals. And, you have to hit I used to be obsessed with hitting a certain bench press scores and whatever. Who knows what it
Me
was?
too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's like, the 225 club and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, it almost sometimes, once you're forced to take that step back, it's amazing how quickly you can go, you know what? Again, takes multiple choices over a period of time, but it's the idea that, you know what? I'm going to do as best I can here. The cards aren't all the same. Just because I have the same Lisfranc fracture as someone else doesn't mean that it affects us in the same way. I might be taller than them, which might impact the weight and the distribution of my foot. It might be the nature of the injury is slightly different. What sport means to them is also what sports is different from what sport means to me. So therefore, our mental side is different, and the family situation, all these factors. And I think it's amazing how easy we can be put into boxes on social media. Without, so I'm just so happy you mentioned that comparison. So just kind of briefly here, just before the end, so we'll let you go. I'd love to know if there's one quite briefly, what's one thing you look back on that you kind of learned the most across this whole journey? It can be something really small, but just is it one piece maybe advice or just an idea or something that you've learned along the way?
Yeah, I love that question because I've learned so much from my journey. I always find it difficult to answer that question. Like, if I could go back and change it all, would I? And the instant answer is, well, obviously, like, it would have been great if I didn't need two new hips, if I never suffered like that. But I wouldn't be the person I am today if I hadn't gone through all of that. So I think back to everything I've learned, and I think there's multiple different lessons I've learned. I think I already spoke about how I've been more open about my journey, and that's usually my number one answer. But a big close number second for me is I've I feel like I've learned what it actually means to be happy and to be satisfied in life, because I literally had to start over. And it's like I feel like so many people have great lives but get caught up in such insignificant stuff, maybe stress with work or being, having goals in mind. I feel like there's people who are um top level athletes running marathons, but because they're not hitting the times that they want to, they're actually less happy than I am being able to walk. So it really shifted my perspective as soon as I woke up from my operation, and I thought, wow, I'm not going to be able to get out of bed for a day. I'm not going to be walking for months. It really just showed me what was really important, and I started to appreciate the little things, and I think it's changed my perspective. I found myself being less stressed about stuff since, if I'm 10 minutes late to work, I'm not worried. And I know work is important, being on time
No,
to
no,
work
for
is
sure.
important,
No,
but
no. Yeah.
stressing about that isn't important. Worrying about maybe eating a certain amount of calories for my gym goals, not really as important anymore. Um, it's just it's changed my perspective on what it means to be happy, and I think for me, I'm happy as long as I'm pain free, and I've got my friends and family, and that my recovery and rebuilding phase is going well. Apart from that, I feel like I've lost interest in a lot of things that I felt were important beforehand. I still love going to the gym. It's something I actually really should talk about more on my page, but I've been going to the gym more or less every day since I turned 16. It was the only thing I could do with my hips, training my upper body. And I look back and I think I was way too into it at one point where I was putting so much pressure on myself. And since the operation, I'm just enjoying training. I'm just enjoying being able to go to the gym and actually train and start training my legs without being in pain. I'm not obsessing over, the performance side of it. I guess it's just taking the pressure off with so much, stuff in my life, because I think that experience of learning how to walk again, it's like, wow, I really should appreciate actually being healthy. Like, I wonder how many people out there don't even appreciate waking up without being in pain. Like, I'm not going to pretend like I wake up every morning and I say, oh, I'm so grateful to be pain free, because that's just not realistic. But it does cross my mind, I would say, every day that, I go for my, daily walk. And I think this time last year, I was doing this on two crutches. So even just being able to live your life pain free, it's so simple. But that's what I've learned, that, being happy and being kind of content and, happy with how your life is going, it's probably a lot more simple than most people would realize.
Don't think I can add any more to that. I think that's brilliant. I think I can't. It summarizes so much of what I'm experiencing as well. Okay, a kind of different stage of that journey. I think that sometimes that idea that I look back at some of the things that I was so stressed about, and I'd worry so much about, and the goals I had and certain things I wanted to do, certain amount of, let's say, a certain job I wanted to work and money I wanted to make. And I'm just like, hang on,
Yeah.
let's just we want to be able to walk pain free right now. And once we get there, as you mentioned, that everything else is a bonus. It doesn't matter what it is. So look, Jack, thank you so much for being here. Honestly, I think I'm pretty blown away with some of the insights you've had, and I'm sure lots of the people listening will be. So look, all the best to your recovery, and yeah, I will speak to you soon.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. I feel like we'll definitely be talking again probably in the near future. So I'm looking forward to it. And thanks again for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. And